Hello.
Hey, everybody.
Hey. First of all, you don't know how excited we are to finally be back here, for me anyway, in New York City, the place where I was born and raised, and still kind of managed to find my way around on the subway.
I am a West Coast kid at heart, raised in the Bay Area, and I rarely make it out to New York, so this is very special to make it out and be back here. It's been like 6 years since I've been here, so I'm pumped.
It's been 2 years since we've been anywhere.
Right, this is true. I want to shout out before we get started that Rise is the work of 3 co-authors, actually, Jeff, myself, and our third co-author who is working on another release, which is his newborn baby. So Philip Huang, a third author of Rise. Shout out to Phil.
Philip. But the two of us actually formed the team for another shared product, as it were. We are the co-hosts of a podcast called They Call Us Bruce, which we have done, how many years have we been doing this thing?
Over 5, yeah.
Over 5 years. And in the course of that, we've actually been engaging in conversations that in many ways resemble the ones we've been having in Rise. The difference that Rise is basically like taking 3 decades of our shared experience and squeezing them together between 2 cardboard covers. And the origin of Rise is kind of simple, right? Back in 2018, people seemed to be discovering Asians. There was this little movie called Crazy Rich Asians, for those of you guys who watch it, which made a lot of money, made a lot of noise, and really got people excited over the fact that, in the words of the news media, the first movie with an Asian American cast to hit Hollywood in the past 25 years have finally arrived. Not since the Joy Luck Club have we seen something as rich and robust and gorgeous and Asian American as this.
Which was technically true, and Crazy Rich Asians was a blast. Great movie. Everyone wanted to go see it. It was so fun. But all those headlines also made it seem like the Joy Luck Club came out in the 90s. Then like nothing happened. We didn't do anything. We're just sitting on our asses. And then Crazy Rich Asians came out, which we knew as followers and commentators, as makers in the Asian American culture, that was simply not true at all. We come from a very robust history. Whether or not it bubbled over the mainstream or not, we knew that we had been busy for 30 years.
And those 30 years were critical because there were 30 years in which multiple generations of Asian Americans who had come of age their entire lives being called Asian Americans were, for the first time, discovering what it meant to be part of a larger pan-ethnic community, were the first time taking this still kind of empty box of what it meant to be Asian American and filling it with stories, filling it with narratives, filling it with color and texture. And that is what the book is about. It is about both the pop culture that took these 3 decades, in some ways to build, right? But it also is about the population itself, the popular history of Asian America. It is an attempt for us to actually invite the world into our world, to see our experiences, the ones we lived in, the ones that to this day we still share, that bind us together. And, just let you into our homes. Just take off your shoes, please.
I think a core question that Rise asks is, who gets to tell our stories? Who deems which stories are important to tell? And when is it that we get the chance to tell them? And for far too often, when it comes to the history of Asians in America, that story has been told by somebody else. We have not been the tellers of our own story. And so this book is an attempt to tell our own story and tell the stories that have not been told, that the mainstream has not sort of picked up on. The ones that we thought were like, oh, when you read the book, you'll be like, oh, I thought that was just me. But this is a thing that happened amongst Asian Americans, and we've been building an Asian American culture over all this time.
This evening in particular is a unique opportunity for us to take Rise, kind of open it up and give it words, give it an actual voice. We've invited some people who we love, people who we've spent a lot of time with, and maybe not enough time with actually in the last couple of years, to come together with us to share their memories, their stories about 3 different critical aspects of who we are as Asian Americans today. We're going to be talking about food, because we're Asian, and how can you not talk about food? Food is love. Food is our soul. Food is really the thing that is kind of the building block in many ways of our culture. We're going to talk about fashion and entertainment, the ways in which we actually present ourselves to the world. And then finally, we're also going to be talking about technology, because also Asian. But also because we have two people with us who, in many ways, just framed the conversation around technology for multiple eras. And that story of not just technology, but success, but starting up in the face of gigantic risk and creating wealth and building empires and transforming the world. That's a story that Asian Americans have been at the center of for, again, 3 decades and more. We'll get started with that soon. I think we should maybe talk a little bit about the format.
Yeah. The book itself is a pop history of Asian America from the 90s to now. It is covering those 3 decades, 90s, 2000s, 2010s. There are 3 co-authors. We kind of roughly, in our respective work, before we joined forces, are kind of working and living and observing in those eras, roughly, more or less. Myself, I run a blog called Angry Asian Man, which I've been doing for, thank you. I've been doing that since 2001.
Before that, and I know that some friends and family from that space are in this room, I launched a magazine called A Magazine.
What's a magazine, man?
You know, it's like a book, only much flatter. and yeah, you know, that was a time in which magazines were the things that kind of gave us identity and a chance to kind of engage in conversation. And then, of course, Philip came along.
Yeah, Philip Huang is the co-founder of a very influential film production company called Huang Fu Productions. They're simply pioneers in the YouTube space. They gave voice to an entire generation. So the 3 of us together decided to combine our forces when born out of all those conversations about the Crazy Rich Asians Joy Luck Club divide, basically, and said, you know, nobody's writing about this. Someone should write a book about this little subculture of Asian America, or you know, somebody should make a documentary about that. That was a really cool phenomenon that happened, and it's gonna be forgotten. You say that enough times. You say somebody should write a book about that. After a while, we're like, maybe we should write. Maybe it's us. Maybe we should write the book about that. Yeah.
But it did take a nation to do it, and we have. Knowing full well that the 3 of us don't exactly represent the complete breadth of diversity in even the Asian American diaspora. We've got 3 East Asian guys, 2 of them named Phil.
Strong Phil American represent, not Filipino American, Phil American representation.
So we reached out again to this vast array of people whose voices and whose stories were incredible, and who we knew we needed to draw from to flesh out this book. And I will say each of them brought more stories of their own, which is why the book is 500 pages. And our editor, Jenny Shu, we got a shout out, Jenny. She was incredibly patient. She was incredibly supportive. She kept on saying it's not 500 pages, even as we got closer to 500 pages. But in the course of that, we found stories that we knew we needed to tell. I often, in these conversations, mention the fact that we interviewed a friend of ours, Sujata Day, who's a YouTuber. She was on Insecure, and she had just made a movie called Definition Please. And Sujata was saying, okay, you know, so this movie is about this woman who had peaked as a girl as a spelling bee champion, because South Asians do that. They do spelling bees. And she's like, I'll let you interview me, but you have to actually tell that story about South Asians and spelling bees. And she recommended somebody to us, a woman named Hiba Ansari, who was herself a spelling bee champion as a child and had a really funny story about it. And so that became part of the book. We turned it into a graphic essay. We have a lot of cartoons and illustrations and visuals in there. And again, it added another layer to the way we're telling the story of Asian America.
Can I just, I want to say this because before we go on, but I do want to give a special shout out to Jenny Shu, our editor, because she honestly, and we met for the first time in person today. After we made this 500-page book together, I met her for the first time in person today. So this is very special. But she believed in the book. And I think the story of the book also is a story of like the people behind the people who make this happen, right? Yeah. The untold stories of the people who are in the right place at the right time. And she was at our publisher, and honestly, she believed in the book and kind of knew what we were trying to do even more than I think the three of us really understood it. You know what I mean? So she shepherded it, and she fought for our book, and it exists now, and it is beautiful, and it looks awesome because she all of her work and ushering that vision. So I want to give her a special shout out.
Thank you, Book Mom.
What else is in the book? Jeff, I know you have a favorite piece in the book that you must share to everyone.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring the visual aid on stage, but you can see it out in the hallway. There is actually literally one piece which, when I'm asked what is my favorite story in the book, it is actually just a simple page, you'll see it out there, that contains kind of a mosaic of images of different things that literally Asians like, right? It's called Stuff Asians Like. And the way that piece came about was we kind of did a crowdsourcing. We reached out on the internet and asked people, what are the non-Asian things? What are the most Asian non-Asian things you can think of, right? What are the things that Asians have adopted and made Asian, right? And people started throwing stuff out, and Xing and Kor, one of our fantastic illustrators, illustrated them, put them together. But things like Costco, luxury goods, and fake luxury goods. Spam, of course. Crab legs.
Ragged sports.
Very large visors. What else? Supreme.
Toblerone.
The entirety of our Asian American experience, especially as descendants of immigrants, really is about this idea that we as Asians only exist in some ways in America. There are no Asians in Asia, right? In Asia, you've got Chinese and Japanese and Koreans and Vietnamese and Indians, and none of those groups really see themselves as being that much in common. But when you come here, we are asked to combine, to Voltron up, to find some sort of common ground. And
but the one item of Stuff Asians Like that holds everybody together.
Oh, right, yes. So Phil reminds me that there was one item that when anybody sees it, not even just Asians, but people of any kind of immigrant background and many non-immigrants as well, they all keyed to it and said, oh my God, yes, I had that in my house. It is the blue tin of Danish butter cookies that does not contain butter cookies.
It's the subtitle of the book is Pop History of Asian America from the 90s to Now. The subtitle would be If You Know, You Know, right? And the funny thing about Stuff Asians Like that piece is that we have an audiobook version of Rise. And in the book it's just an illustrated list, but the narrator for the book, and when he reads that piece, he is hype. He's like, Costco, spam, fake luxury goods. He's just like, all right, man, go. Yeah.
The reason I love the piece isn't just because it's nostalgic and funny and cool, but also because it underscores the fact that the reason why we're Asian American isn't because we are Asian, it's because we're American, right? Our Asianness comes from the fact that we're here together and that we are a part of and making American history. So the last thing I think we really want to say is that this is a pop history of Asian America, but it really is a pop history of America. Our history is American history, and the more that we actually can bring these stories together and put them out there into the world, the more clear it is that this is our collective history.
Yeah.
So actually, with that, let's talk a little about tonight. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
That was our little advertisement.
Yeah.
But tonight, of course, is something particularly special. Like I said, it is us kind of unpacking Rise and bringing it to you live. And we're doing that through 3 podcasts that we're going to be recording basically back to back. There'll be a few minutes of transition between each. Each will have different guests, and we'll introduce them as they come on. Our podcast has kind of 2 segments, if you want to describe them.
Yeah.
Phil.
So the first half, and we only have 30 minutes for each of these, so this will be kind of a truncated version of this. But the way it goes, we do standard like interview conversation style in the first half, which will be 15 minutes, I guess. And then the second half is something which is our favorite segment of the show, our signature segment, called The Good, the Bad, and the WTF. Jeff, would you please lay down the rules of engagement?
You're going to hear that 3 times. So yes, I will, Phil. The rules of engagement for The Good, the Bad, and the WTF are, it is our roundtable segment, our favorite segment, our signature segment. It is where we ask our guests to take a single topic and serve it up 3 ways: the good, the positive of it, the bad, the negative, and then the WTF, the still puzzling of it. And so we will be doing that as the second segment of each of these podcasts. And we haven't really given a lot of preparation to our podcast guests. So what you hear will be live, spontaneous, and hopefully fun and enriching. So with that, I think we're ready to go for our very first of our podcasts. If we can change the slide and show a little introduction. What we'll be talking about is food. And as you can see here, these are 2 pages from Rise that 2 of our guests for that first podcast contributed. Agnes Chung Talde, please join us on stage. Food writer extraordinaire and author of Asian American Food Glow Up. And then can we have Dale Talde, top chef. And then Frankie Huang, who is both a contributor. Yeah, come on up. Who did our elevated or appropriated piece about the ways in which Asian food culture essentially is translated, shall we say, subtitled perhaps, by American culture. And Frankie's also the deputy editor-in-chief of JoySauce, a new publication focusing on elevating and celebrating Asian American culture. So again, thank you guys. Let's give a big round of applause for our guests. And now we sit. All right. So Phil, are we going to do the
full-on intro?
Full-on intro?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're going to treat this just like we're recording the podcast in our garages and stuff like that. So let's do it. You ready to go?
Yeah.
All right.
Let's do it.
Hello and welcome to this very special edition of They Call Us Bruce, an unfiltered conversation about what's happening in Asian America. Live from the Greene Space in WNYC. What's up?
Woo! Hello, New York!
I'm Phil Yu.
And I'm Jeff Yang. And we have a terrific lineup of guests for you today. In this, the first of a series of live podcasts we're doing, again, at the historic Greene Space, celebrating a little book we wrote called Rise, and looking back at the different things that brought us together and made us stand out as Asian Americans over the course of these last 3 decades. This one is about food. So, of course, we've got some fantastic food guests. We're going to start here with, on my right, Frankie Huang. She is the deputy editor-in-chief of JoySauce and a contributor to Rise. Welcome, Frankie.
Hello.
To her right, Dale Talde, who really needs no introduction, top chef, restaurateur, man about town, style icon. Thank you, Dale, for joining us.
Thank you.
And Agnes Chung Talde, who is both Dale's better half and a food writer extraordinaire, somebody who, for our book, Rise, shared both a personal story and the story in many ways of Asian food's arrival in America. Welcome, Agnes.
So why don't we kick it off? And by way of introducing yourself, maybe we could talk about your relationship to Asian food and Asian America.
Well, Dale can start it because he has a book called Asian American.
Yes.
Dale Talde. I'm the chef and founder of Food Crush Hospitality, and Agnes's husband, more importantly. And for me, food was, it's this, right? If you're Filipino, or if you know what this is, you know what's up. It means you eat with your hands, right? This is how you pull rice up. So immediately, almost knowing at our family's table that this was different, that eating with your hands was like something totally foreign. Eating rice with your hands was foreign to other people. So that's my relationship. I understood that. I understood that my mom was a fantastic cook, that the sisters in the family, my aunts, were great cooks, and it's what got me interested in food. It was after school at 3:30, coming home and watching Martin Yan, and this was Martin Yan, this was Emeril Lagasse, it's watching those chefs with my mother and my mom going, turning her, that's too much cheese, that's too much salt. And then me going, oh, I'd like to try that. So that's how I kind of get into food.
I want to ask you, Dale, because we've had a conversation before in the past, specifically about Filipino food. And I told you, it's like, I love Filipino food. It is just somehow, it's somewhere deep in my DNA. I've got, a little bit of like adobo in there or something. It's just something which I've always wondered why Filipino food isn't a bigger cuisine in American culture, right? And you actually told me a reason. You were like, it doesn't look appetizing the same way.
I think that it doesn't look as appetizing. I mean, I think people see it as a very it's like a comfort food, right? It's very. We haven't gotten to the point where we have the Hunis, the Martin Yans. Yeah, we have great chefs who are Filipino, but I also think another reason why Filipino food isn't out there is because as Filipinos, we're very accommodating, and we are, I think Filipinos are a culture that when we visit other places, we're always like, oh, if I'm in Rome, I'm going to eat matriciana. I'm going to eat cacio e pepe. My wife's family, they go to Rome and they're like, did you see that Korean restaurant over there? I wonder what that place is like. And then they go in and go, that place was shit. And you're like, yeah,
So
because,
true.
you don't eat Korean food in Rome. But they're always like, I have to try Korean food in Italy. And you're like, I don't know if you do. We're Filipinos, we're always down to try other things. I mean, our number one export is, labor. So we're in all parts of the, we raised on the Upper East Side, we're on the Upper West Side, we're raising all those kids up there, and then the nurse in the hospital, we're raising, we're helping you guys through sickness. So we've been able to export, and then we come in and we assimilate like, oh, we don't have the food of back home, but we're in New York now. Let's eat pizza and try Joe's and try John's on Bleecker or try all these other foods. So for us, we like to eat our food, but we also like to enjoy kind of the terroir of where we are, right?
Frankie, I want to ask you also about this notion of the terroir of where we are, right? Because it feels, if you could share a little of your own food story, but also talk a little bit about this whole notion of how food becomes a part of culture and how sometimes the culture consumes the food and maybe not so much the people behind them.
I feel like I need a whole hour to cover all of that. But let's see, catch me if I go adrift. So I'm from China, and so are my parents, and my father survived a famine. I mean, the whole country did. But his relationship with food is slightly desperate, a little bit pathological even. He really loves the feeling of getting really full. He likes quantity. So when he cooks, he always cooks a lot, and he gets really mad when I don't finish on my food. So as a result, I also sometimes overeat a little bit, and that feeling of discomfort of being like, oh God. That's also really comforting to me. And I feel like our family histories really shapes our relationship with food. And for my dad, the kitchen was really his space. To the point that he was so protective, he didn't teach me how to cook. I had to learn on YouTube. And I've always been a little bit competitive. Whenever he comes over, I'd always make him something really fancy, and then he'll be like, it's okay. The rice wine you used clearly wasn't very good. But yeah, that's just the story about how I feel like every family's unique history and relationship with the kitchen and food and feeding each other really shapes our relationship. And all of this is kind of lost when Columbusers, when white people come and say, this looks nice, let me make a prettier, cleaner, whatever version of it and sell it for a lot of money and tell people, look, I discovered this really lovely cuisine from that weird place over there, but I made sure that I made it in a way that's really healthy. It doesn't have MSG in it. It's not gonna make you sick. This is the improved version. And that was what my comic was about in Rise. When people take the things that mean a lot to us and turn it into a product without a story and pretend that it's a better version of it.
Wow. I mean, Got to read the comic too. It's a very funny version of exactly what Frankie said, but that's the one that hit me right in the gut. And Agnes, I'm going to ask you also because your story is kind of about how Asian food, I don't want to say assimilated or even acculturated into America, but rather America finally got to kind of love Asian food. If you could share a little about your personal food history, but also your contribution to Rise.
Sure. I started off as a reporter, and I covered everything from hurricanes, the sports, the politics, and I found myself always being drawn to food. So I left that, went into food hosting. And the one thing I really realized was, that's if your taste buds don't lie. Everybody knows when something's delicious. And when I was younger, my mom didn't know. She bought me Lunchables or she packed Korean food. It was one or the other. And during Christmas and Thanksgiving, I was the one that I looked up how to make a turkey and how to make stuffing. And I was like, here, Mom and Dad, look. And they're like, it's okay. I don't. I'd rather eat Korean food. But that was my journey. I really loved food. I thought it was something where if I showed it to someone, it was like, hey, this is good. Just try it. And if they did, it was a way for me to make friends, share a table, share experiences. And my story was about how nowadays kids are packing nori to school as snacks. Back then, you're like, ew, seaweed? That's in the ocean. Now it's like the healthy, great thing that everybody has, and if you don't have it, you're not cool. So that was kind of how everything has kind of changed when they realized, like, oh, this is a cool, healthy thing. And even if it's not healthy, it's delicious. They're discovering how awesome our food is, which I love. And
Discovering,
exactly. When we've been around forever. Exactly.
I was at the playground with my daughter like a little while back, and I saw this other kid, it's a little white kid, take a snack break, and he was eating seaweed, like nori snack, like straight out of the package, eating like it was chips, and I was like, it messed me up for like a couple weeks, man.
Times have changed.
I was like, whoa. I mean, I think there is this kind of almost fetishistic kind of fixation with the lunchbox moment. Now it's almost cliche now for everyone to say like, oh, they made fun of me when I brought my smelly food, But I think that it's so powerful. It's a really powerful illustration still for a lot of us because there is a whole generation of us who like could not fathom that we could have the kind of food just look outside on the street right here, and you'll see like Asian restaurants kind of just all over the place. The food that we grew up with that we thought was like much like the contents of our book Rise, like we thought this was just our thing, you know what I mean? And now it's being enjoyed by everybody. Like that is the Asian food glow up, right? That's incredible.
Yeah, I've definitely realized that our kids have nut allergies. Don't bring them now. It's like our kids also have sesame allergies because people are bringing sesame products in, which is new.
It's the ingredients that we've grown up with are now triggering people's anaphylactic shock. It's good to know that we have arrived, but there is absolutely a sense in which that whole question about how food represents culture and who gets to again tell the story of food is a kind of a theme in the book. There is a sense in which Asian food is something that more and more people enjoy. Do they always enjoy the people who are making that food? Certainly over the last couple of years, we haven't necessarily seen that expressed quite as well. And I think that's, one of the most interesting things about the last couple of years in particular, let's say 5 years, right, is how much more public we've been able to get with our food and our faces, right? I mean, we've always loved taking pictures of our food. That's how you know we love food, because we take pictures of it. Oh my God, it's so
Camera
beautiful.
eats first.
Yeah, exactly. It's like our kids and then our food. That's how much we take pictures. But now we're actually starting to see more and more of the faces of the people behind the food, whether it's television chefs, people on shows like Top Chef, or even if it's like Instagram and YouTube and TikTok food creators. More and more visible Asian faces are being associated with delicious Asian food. And I guess that's kind of changed things, right? I mean, that's made a difference.
I think we have a section about reality television actually in the book, and I would say something like by the way, I am actually kind of geeking out because Dale's here because I am such a Top Chef fan, and his season actually was one of my favorites ever actually. And so, but I think that shows like that have gone a long way towards creating humanity around the makers of the food, right?
I mean, I specifically remember season 4 when I won't call her out, and she's a very good friend, but she said, you know, it's Dale. All he does is Asian food, Asian food, Asian food, Asian food. And then I got the playback on that, and I was like, you know, that's fucked up because, like, these Italian, like, like, Italian chef comes on that, like, oh, I own an Italian, and they're not even Italian. They're like, hey, yo, I'm from here, but they're doing, they're like some, dude from Oklahoma or whatever, but he's like, oh, I love Italian food, so I'm serving Italian food. But you would never question that on that show, but because of who I was and what I was doing, it always got questioned, or it was always like, oh, you're making this again. I'm like, Asia's like a huge place. It's not like a small little place, but, I think that you feel there's a little bit more freedom to take shots at people like that. When, to criticize when, just to criticize us.
One of the criticisms that Dale and I hate the most is when they say our food is overpriced or seems expensive. Because we use like the freshest ingredients and so many different spices. And why would you say our food, oh, that's expensive for Chinese food? Why would you say that? That is insane. So that's when Dale and I always say, like, we hate when anybody says that, because we're like, why shouldn't it be priced the way it should be priced?
But it's generally us who say that.
That's why we try to stop it.
Real talk is, it's usually Filipinos who will come into my place and be like, man, it's not really Filipino food. I was like, I never said it was. And they're like, and it's really expensive. And I was like, for what? But I've also encouraged some of my friends, because, I mean, even our friends do it. They do it, they'll say it about, and Agnes, listen, I'm gonna call them out because our homies, the Korean, they'll say, oh, I love his restaurant. It's really good, but isn't it expensive? I go, isn't it expensive for who?
Oh, whenever they say like panchan isn't free, Dale's like, it shouldn't be free.
Nothing is free. Nothing's free. But like they'll say, oh, his food, I go, if we as Filipinos and as Koreans and Chinese, if our community stops saying it, it'll give less Korean or other cultures, mainly white people, will be like, they'll start to value it, right? You don't go to John George and be like, yo, that was $400, man, that was expensive. You knew what you were getting into when you go eat there. That shit is expensive. But why can't our food be as expensive and as revered and have that price tag on it? But we have to be the ones first to say, stop saying it's expensive for X, Y, and Z. Just say it's good, or if it's bad, but don't put the price tag on it, because then it gives everyone the right to say that our food is lesser than.
I totally hear you, and I do think it's changing. I mean, I think there's an entire new generation, a new cohort of chefs who are making food and making not just food but restaurants that feel as if they're very much worth the very hefty price tag, and that actually brings us, I think, to another dimension, and maybe the last conversation we can have before going to the break, which is not just about the food that we brought here, but the food we discovered here. I mean, Agnes, you mentioned Thanksgiving turkeys, right? I think I kind of feel like Thanksgiving is the one most Asian American of holidays in some ways, because we take the standard spread, the Thanksgiving, like dishes that date back to the Mayflower and to the Indians before them, who were like, oh, welcome, come in. Oh, wait, what is this disease I'm getting? What is going on here? There's like this whole sort of story behind the story. But when we come here, we kind of almost like recolonize the food and turn it into something of our own. I feel like if you are Chinese and you've not had a Thanksgiving turkey stuffed with sticky rice, and Chinese sausage.
That sounds delicious. It's the move. It's the move.
So we make the food here ours as well. I actually want to ask that of both you, Frankie, and you, Dale, this whole notion of like the food that we embrace, especially as immigrants or as children of immigrants. Why are there certain things that we gravitate towards as Asian Americans? The big one being, by the way, and it's on the Stuff Asians Like poster, McDonald's Filet-O-Fish. I have no idea why Asians love it so much, but they do.
Theories.
So I actually am one of those Asians who's not that into filet-o-fish. My mom, however,
Inhale, everybody. No.
my mom, however, will that's the only thing from McDonald's that she would eat, and she's one of those like Asian stomach ladies. I think there are a lot of those out there. Not Asian stomach, Chinese stomach. Will travel anywhere and she'll look for a Chinese restaurant, and then if
Same,
she can't
right, yeah.
find a
That's
Chinese
me.
restaurant, she'll look for a McDonald's and get a filet-o-fish. And I think she's a Southern Chinese lady, and fish is just, she used to eat it every day, and then she came to the US, and she hates like all Western food, but sometimes when she can't cook for herself, she'll go for the thing that feels the closest to Chinese food. So I think for a lot of our elders especially, or new immigrants who are not used to eating things here, you'll look for the next best thing to let your Chinese stomach or your Korean stomach, what have you, feel okay. This is like, being an immigrant means you make do with what you can. Obviously, you can't go to bed hungry, but this is almost Chinese food.
Filet-o-fish is the Chinese food of McDonald's.
Yeah, basically.
It's tonkatsu.
It is, yeah, sort of.
It's like the new tonkatsu trend. You guys see like the $250 Wagyu. McDonald's is way ahead of the curve, man. They were doing this long time ago, except with fish. So, I mean, I don't know. Anything with tartar sauce on me, I'm a sucker for it. So that's why I like them. I mean,
I kind of agree. I think there's something about the combination of crispiness and flakiness and creaminess, and that sort of like weird shredded cardboard lettuce that they have on top. All that kind of, the different contrasts in textures and even mouth feels makes it feel a little bit different from like a burger, for instance, right? But yeah, so the things we kind of gain and make Asian as immigrants, are there any things that you remember actually growing up with and saying, this is the American treat, or this is the thing that the kids demanded when the parents wanted to just eat, real Asian food? I know for us, we would have we'd come home from school and we'd make ourselves raviolis with cut up little hot dogs and stuff. We would crave pizza and Kentucky Fried Chicken. Those are ways for us, in some ways, to assert that we have kind of an Americanness to us. Even when honestly, when I was much younger as a kid, I rejected eating Chinese food to the point where I would be the only one sitting with an empty plate at a Chinese restaurant, demanding to. The spoiled brat that I was. My sister's here in the audience nodding her head very vigorously. Because I didn't want to be associated with this food that to me was so sort of traumatizing, right? The food that people mocked and laughed at. It is that lunchbox noon. So just kind of wondering what if you had any kind of relationships with food like that.
Well, I love Spam, but I'm kind of surprised. Back then, people thought Spam was gross, but now everyone thinks it's cool. So. Yeah, it was always
But
one of those
we made
things.
it cool.
Yeah, I think exactly. And people were like, "Oh, you're on something." So that was one thing I kind of remember. I love Spam, and everyone's like, "That thing in a can, that's like fake meat." You're like, "It's delicious."
We could write an entire book on the geopolitical implications of Spam and its
100%.
global reach.
Yeah.
100%.
It is the meat of colonialism.
Yeah.
So I have a American food that I liked, and it's actually just lettuce that's not cooked.
Oh, raw lettuce.
So the Chinese name for lettuce is literally raw vegetable, and I actually grew up in Beijing, where I ate Chinese food every day. Everything, all the vegetables are stir fried. My parents continue to stir fry lettuce when I joined them in the U.S., and I wanted to eat it raw, and that was I wanted to feel American. The children at school are eating raw salad, and so will I. My parents were just not about it.
It's not healthy.
Yeah, they said you're gonna get diarrhea. You can't eat raw things.
All right. Well, on that note, it's a good time for us to take a break. But when we return, we will do our favorite segment, the good, the bad, and the WTF. So stick around. We'll be right back. Boop. Break. Okay, we're not really going to take a break.
We're not really taking a break.
Yeah.
This is the audio break for the show, but we're actually back in almost right away.
Okay. And we're back. All right. On the second half of They Call Us Bruce. On the second half of They Call Us Bruce, this is where we do our favorite segment, our signature segment, the good, the bad, and the WTF. Jeff Yang, as is our custom, would you quickly lay down the rules of engagement?
I shall. Thank you, Phil. So this is our roundtable segment. Again, our favorite segment, the segment where we take a single topic and we serve it up 3 ways. We are going to talk first about the good, the positive, the warm, the fuzzy aspect of it, then the negative, the frustrating, maybe the enraging aspect of it, and then finally the WTF, the thing we're still puzzling over. And we thought maybe we'd do the good, the bad, and the WTF of I don't know, Asian American food culture. How does that sound?
Asian American food culture, right? So that's broad. You can do
broad.
whatever
So
you
broad.
want with that, right? So feel free to fit in whatever good, bad, and WTF, whatever. If you have something to get off your chest, do it now. If you have something to raise up and spotlight, do it now as well.
So we'll start with the goods. And we'll begin with Agnes. We'll go through here, and then we'll do the bads, come back the other direction, and then we'll finish off with the WTFs. So, Agnes, what is the good about Asian American food culture?
I would say the good about it is that people can relate to us more in a way and understand how food connects us as a family, understand why it's such a strong part of our identity. And it's something where anybody with taste buds could understand. So that's what I think is the good about
It's a universal language.
Yeah, exactly.
Dale, what is your good for Asian American food culture?
The second generation of Asian American chefs starting to come up. The Vietnamese American, Korean American, Filipino American, Chinese American. I think that is, we spent so long not fitting anywhere, right? I wasn't Filipino enough for people from the Philippines, and I for damn sure wasn't American in most people's eyes, right? What country are you from? Chicago. I'm from here, bro. But so for this longest time, we had this kind of crisis of like, it's identity, like where do we fit? We don't fit in anywhere. And now through food, we're able to tell these stories of like, listen, my restaurant, when I had Talde, and we really were just saying, hey, this is the culture of a second generation American, a second generation Filipino American. And this is what happens when when you grow up in Chicago and you love food and you love all these different cultures. So I think that's good. That's awesome to see.
That is awesome. All right. Frankie, what's your good?
So I'm a very online person, capital V, capital O. And so I observe a lot of the food culture on the internet, especially in the last couple years. And what I really love is just the passion that people feel for our foods, for other Asian foods, in such that if someone, does a bad, Columbusing recipe or, attacks us and says that it's stinky, we will go to war. And that just makes me really happy because I know that this doesn't extend just to the food, but it makes me feel good to see us get together and defend one another and tell people to fuck off when they mess with our food.
Nothing better than mob rule. Just kidding. But yeah, okay. So there's the good side of that. Let's talk about the bad side. What is bad about Asian American food culture?
So continue in the same vein. Still the very online version is the gatekeeping.
Yeah.
Especially as a diaspora person, as someone who left China and have been observing the way food, grows and innovates here. I love seeing people get creative and play and incorporate new elements that they learn from here, from other adjacent cultures, or even just something wildly different. And I think this is mainly like a diaspora versus the source land kind of battle, because you'll see like a Taiwanese American person say, hey, I did a new 3-cup chicken. And then maybe across the pond, people are like, how dare you? This is inauthentic. My grandma doesn't make it like this. And it's just like, fine, okay, it's still good. So yeah, that's the bad.
Challenge the story of authenticity sometimes because we're still Asian, we're still here, and we're still making stuff, right? Okay, Dale, what is your bad?
Bubble tea.
Oh!
Yo,
Shots fired.
If Philip were here. Shots
People need
fired.
to chill on that, man. It is this. It's not tea. That is not tea.
It has tea.
I'm sorry, that is not tea. That is dessert. That is like 1,500 calories. People need to chill, man.
Open up your mind.
No. We don't. You don't need multiple bubble tea places on the same block, but there is, and you don't even need them in the same like strip mall. But
Giving
there is.
people what they need.
I mean,
Yo,
there are
bubble
like
tea's
Starbucks that are like
OC,
inside
man.
other Starbucks
It is,
though. So.
It is OC. It is out of control. I can't. That, and I love chili crisp, but man, it is like my homies put it on ice cream. I was like, Jay, you cross the line. That is where I stop. Like, I love invention. I love you inventing new things, but you just put chili crisp on ice cream? No. That's the bad.
It's good.
Yeah, man, I'm gonna call him out. Jay Lee, boy, from No On. Best burger in the city, but put chili crisp on ice cream. And I was like, Jay, you lost me. You lost me.
Shots fired on this podcast.
I was gonna say something similar about having cheese on everything because everybody wants that like stretchy picture, or when you know it doesn't taste good but it looks good, and everyone just wants the picture, but you know it doesn't taste that good. You just want to stand in line and say you got it, but you know it's not good, so stop.
I feel like Koreans put cheese on everything.
I know.
now,
I'm
right?
more directing it at my people.
Yeah.
Like, stop.
Yeah.
Like it gets me so mad. I'm like, it doesn't need it. It actually like kind of kills the spiciness. Okay, stop.
My theory on that is that Korea, I'm talking about South Korea, discovered cheese within the last like 3 decades.
Oh my God, we love it.
And then they were like, this is amazing because of pasteurization, all that kind of stuff. They finally figured it out, and then they were like, let's put it on everything.
It doesn't need it. Stop.
Okay, Agnes and Dale, can I blow both of your minds? Sure. There's cheese tea, where you put cheese foam on top of bubble tea. It's all the rage in China.
I can't.
They're like walking
You have
off
to
the
try
stage
it
now.
before you hate on it.
Yeah.
Oh
Wrong.
no.
Wrong. And I'm down for a lot of things.
It's so good.
Blood, chocolate meat, the nuguan, I'll eat all that. No, not that.
All right. So I think we've entered in already to the WTF territory of Asian American food culture. But let's do it. Let's bring it home. We will start with Dale. Actually, what is your WTF of Asian American food culture?
Gordon Ramsay having a Chinese restaurant. Yo, man, that dude's Michelin starred. Yo, but and I got respect for him. Like, he has some serious restaurants, but like Lucky Cat. And like he caught a little bit of shit for it, and then it went away. And then he just did another MasterChef, or he did something else. And listen, man, he's got chops, but like that was like that type of restaurant is like, oh, let's get tonkatsu, kalbi, pho, pad thai, lumpia. That you go to those restaurants and you look at that and you go, oh no, we can't. No, I can't eat here. It is that like confusing, that to me is. I mean, it kind of sounds like one of the restaurants I have, but like, but like, wait a minute.
More shots fired. All right, Frankie.
All right, inspired by all these fighting words, I'm gonna say what the fuck is Uncle Roger.
Oh.
Get it. Get after it.
Like his first video, like making fun of Gordon Ramsay, was pretty funny, but like I realized later, soon after, that he doesn't even cook. And he's making commentary about whether or not people are making rice correctly. He's like making himself into a food personality. And when I listen to his podcast, he would say like, oh, I hate to cook. I go out to restaurants all the time. And I'm just like, if you're gonna make that your bit and make that your brand, learn to cook. Talk about this with some authority.
Don't just use the accent as your defense, basically. Yeah.
Exactly.
I will say though, he was absolutely right about the rice. That rice video he did, it was truly a horrifying thing.
Don't you hate when they're right? Because then you're like, oh, why?
All right. What is your WTF? Bring us home.
I think mine more is like the review culture a little bit. It's a normal person would go and be like, oh, I won't go back. There's like a million restaurants in New York City to go to, but what makes you go home and go, let me tell everyone that this was bad? I just, that's my WTF moment. Like, just go home and just don't go back. Go find another place. So.
If you have nothing to say that's nice, don't say it.
Exactly.
Yes. Just put it on Yelp. All right.
All right.
All right.
That is our 3 rounds: good, bad, and WTF. And so that does it for this episode of They Call Us Bruce. Agnes, how can people find you online?
Instagram at Agnes Chung, Chung. I kept my maiden name for my handle. Sorry, babe.
No.
Excellent. Dale, how about yourself?
Yeah, just Instagram. It's at Dale Talde, and Twitter at Dale Talde, and I have a TikTok. I think it's the same, but I just look. I don't post that much.
Frankie?
All right. Look up Frankie Huang on either Twitter or Instagram. I think the only other famous Frankie Huang is a Taiwanese actor. So also go on JoySauce and read the great stories that I'm publishing. Yeah.
Great. And Jeff Yang?
I'm Original Spin on Twitter. How about yourself, Phil?
You can find me at Angry Asian Man and on angryasianman.com. You can find They Call Us Bruce at They Call Us Bruce. Thank you so much for coming and talking food with us.
Woo!
Thanks for having me.
Until next time.
Peace. All right. We got to move. Thank you guys so much. You're amazing. All right. We're going to go right into our next segment. And our next segment is compressing. All right. Actually, Phil, why don't you move over one? Because I think we only have two guests. We're going to be compressing two generously sized topics into one when we talk about both fashion and entertainment. So let us bring our guests out right now. Come on down. Minji Kim, fashion designer, costume designer, boutique owner, style setter. Thank you, Minji. And writer and comedian, Karen Chee. Come on down.
All right. Well, shall we just get going?
Let's get going.
Okay.
All right.
I'm going to be doing this another time after this, so just bear with us. You good? Yeah. Okay.
Socks.
Oh, thank you. Yes, these are my nunchuck socks today.
Oh, thank you.
All right. Ready? Hello and welcome to another special edition of They Call Us Bruce, an unfiltered conversation about what's happening in Asian America, live from WNYC's Greene Space. Greene Space!
As always, we have fantastic guests. This time especially fantastic because it is the second in our series of live podcasts brought to you here by the Greene Space and by us. This one is going to be focusing on kind of two gigantic topics that for whatever reason we decided to fuse into one. And those are fashion and entertainment. So we have with us today breakthrough boutique owner back in the 1990s, fashion designer, costume designer for TV, for film, Minji Kim. Thank you, Minji, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And we have one of the funniest and sweetest people I know, writer, comedian, star of late night TV, Karen Chee.
I want to give a special shout out to Fania Su, who was a contributor to our book, and she kind of helped put this panel together, but she was called away for health circumstances. So shout out to Fania. But we can have an awesome panel without her, so I hope you're listening.
Riddance.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
I want to start off, and like Jeff said, we kind of mashed two huge topics together for this panel, but maybe you guys could, by way of your own sort of introductions, maybe talk about how you got to where you are right now. So I guess the short version. And did you, coming up, have an inkling for fashion or comedy, or was it something that came into your life later?
Okay. Well, I'm Karen Chee. I'm a comedian and writer. I've always had a huge inkling for fashion. I feel like I came to fashion quite late, and truly a few months ago, my mom was like, "Karen, dress better," and I was like, "Actually, great point, Mom. I'm always just wearing a burlap sack, and I essentially just had 4 T-shirts that I would just wear, one per day, but just back to back." I realized you wanted me to answer a comment.
Nobody actually had to dress well over the last couple of years, at least
That's
not below the
true.
waist, right? It was just sort of like...
Yeah. Below the waist, I was naked. And also above the waist, yeah. Lots of HR problems.
Room rater. Question mark out of 10? So, part of the reason why we put these two together in a way was because, especially through these 3 decades, it wasn't just about the independent tracks of fashion and entertainment. It really was, in some ways, about how Asian Americans started to learn to kind of like be Asian American in public, right? To express themselves visually as Asian American. And I kind of say that because certainly, being an Asian American, when you walk in the room, people have immediate expectations or preconceptions of you, right? Whether you're talking about being in a writer's room or in a showroom, a retail space. They think something about you. They know something about you. And I feel like that's something that changed a lot over the decades. Maybe we just jump back to when you were growing up in America, and you grew up in the
Bay Area?
2000s?
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Yes. Yeah.
And in the Bay Area.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Did you feel like it was comfortable to just sort of be kind of publicly Asian American? I mean, the Bay Area you probably did, and in the 2000s.
I mean, I did. I was born. I mean, I also grew up in the late 90s. I was born in 1995, and so I think in the Bay Area, everybody's Asian. So
Hella Asian.
It
as we
is.
said, yes.
Yeah, and I think because of that, I felt really comfortable being Asian in terms of, I like my teachers and like public schools were Asian, my family friends were Asian, and we were also all different kinds of Asian people who had a lot of like other immigrant families, but it's really cute because a lot of our moms were really close, but they all spoke different languages. And so in my mind, I'm like, I don't know how you guys all got so close, but it's very sweet to me to see that. So in that sense, it did feel very Asian, but all the books we were reading at school, all the movies, all the things on TV weren't Asian. So there was this very big divide of like, in your personal life, you can be Asian and that's normal. And then if I wanted to like be somebody on TV, or like if I was writing a story, my protagonists were always like white girls with brown hair, which is so heartbreaking. Now when I go back and like look at journals or look at stories I wrote when I was little, I'm like, man, at some point when I was like 8 or 9, the protagonist changed from looking like me to being a description of like a quiet white girl. Yeah, and then I think in college is when I was like, oh, this is horrifying. I didn't even realize that happened, and then I aggressively changed it back. Yeah.
Became aggressively Asian.
Yeah.
Minji, how about yourself? And I know that you were actually a big part of the kind of emergence of the New York fashion scene with your boutique Mink, right? Was it? Well, tell a little story about how you got here and how you built that.
I grew up first I was born in South Korea, and then my parents immigrated here when I was 7. To Massachusetts, and they did a lot of moving around, and I had quite a different experience from you.
Massachusetts, yeah.
Massachusetts.
I've been there. I've seen
I did
the
live
racism.
in California for briefly, but they were never part of a community, and they chose for some reason not to be part of an Asian community. They couldn't handle Los Angeles. They couldn't handle New York. So they chose to go and really plant themselves in the whitest place imaginable, which is the North Shore of Massachusetts. So I grew up very much thinking that I was a white person. And
not just writing fiction of yourself as a white person.
but like, I mean, I knew day to day that I was Asian because everybody made that clear to me because I was the only Asian person in wherever I was. But in my fantasy life, and in the way I chose to kind of express myself, my creativity, everything I think was about trying not to be Asian. I know that's not the most positive thing to say.
No, that's okay.
But that's how I coped. And through that, like, grew my creativity and grew my desire. Like, I have to get the fuck out of here. Like, I have to go somewhere where I belong, and I don't even know where that is, but like New York, it's like Andy Warhol made it there. All the people that I look up to, whether they're Asian, whatever it is, like creatively, that's where my calling is. So I think.
How did you start how did you come to New York? Did you just come with a dream and
I went to school here. I went to Parsons.
Mm-hmm.
I did the whole Project Run, like Parsons is based on Project Runway, Project Runway is based on Parsons. Went through that whole like factory of creating fashion designers, and I graduated in '92. I worked on 7th Avenue for about 3 years, and it ate me up. Like I was 22. I was working at big design companies, and I couldn't handle it. Like this girl coming from Massachusetts trying to hide, and like all of a sudden it's like, oh, you're exposed, and here you are, and like do this, and so I left. I was like, I can't mentally handle this. I cannot be in the spotlight. So I chose to open up my own store, and my whole goal was like, well, I'll do this for a year, I'll fail. And then I'll go to NYU and go into costume design, which was like another, but I never failed. And I only came into costume design about 7 years ago.
I love that you're like, if I fail, I have to go to NYU.
I'm like, damn it.
That's the fallback these days. It's like, if I can't make the NBA, I guess I'll go to med school, But yeah, for real. So very.
I think that
stereotypical.
the reason why so much of our book is dedicated to media representation and it is because that we grew up in an era where we saw ourselves so seldom reflected on the screen, right? And so and our stories kind of reflect that in a lot of ways. And so when someone bubbles up and when they make a difference and you see them all of a sudden like, oh, like when I saw Karen on late night, I was like, who is that? Like who is that? Like who is that making jokes? I was like, that's something I would have seen when I was growing up, right? And so what I want to know actually is, what is it like being the first and being the only is tough. It's hard for any of these industries. Do you guys have stories of your own where you were the only one in the room, where you were the first, where you were, you were the only one, and then you were made to feel like you were the only one?
Ooh. Do you have one off the top of your head?
Probably every design space, if you go into Tommy Hilfiger or like Calvin Klein, it's all mostly, white people.
At the top, it's white people, and then the people actually making garments. Not
That's
as
true.
much.
If you went into the factories, it would be, the seamstresses and the actual production.
I mean, that's I think part of the thing about the sort of emergence of Asian Americans on, it's interesting because it's almost the reverse in some ways. Like I think that the story of Hollywood is that you saw Asian Americans in front of the screen before you got them behind the screen as writers and as creators. And in fashion, there were always Asian Americans behind the scene.
Oh, tons.
Right?
That's
but the first time they became visible to the world was much, much later felt, right?
That's fascinating, yeah.
And, I think it's because it's like a little bit of a different thing. It's like, you can be, if you're Asian American performing Asianness, right, you're allowed to occupy a certain space. But the fantasy that fashion brings very often, is about aspirations that people don't necessarily associate with Asia. You talk about Tommy Hilfiger. There's an aspirational quality to the lifestyle being sold by a Ralph Lauren, a
Yeah,
Tommy
they didn't know
Hilfiger.
that like a little Asian girl, 23-year-old, was designing that shit.
Exactly. The thing I think which is different, Karen, about your journey is that in some ways you did something which is a very kind of modern Asian American kind of mechanism.
What did I do?
You spoke a dream into the world. You spoke kind of a wish
Oh,
into the world
yes.
and kind of made it come true. And for a lot of Asian Americans who are, I think back in the 1990s, we were like afraid to take up space. We didn't even want to sort of claim things. We certainly didn't feel like we had the right to ask for things as Asian Americans. But what I remember, Karen, is that you had this moment where you actually spoke out to Twitter, I want to do this thing. And then you were cast in Shang-Chi as... No.
Yeah. Shang-Chi is my older brother. I'm Karen Chee. It's a family film. No, so we were talking about the Golden Globes.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I will say I was working as a comedian before that, so it wasn't like an overnight thing. I always feel like I have to say that because somebody once reported it very well-intentioned, but made it sound like I had done nothing in comedy and then suddenly got a job, and then a bunch of white people online were mad at me. And I was like, no, I had been in New York. I was doing stand-up every single night. I was already writing for The New Yorker for a few years. I was writing for like McSweeney's. I'd been doing improv for years. And then I did tweet, like, I had heard Sandra Oh was hosting the Golden Globes, and I was so excited. Like, I couldn't picture it at that time. Like, before it happened, I couldn't picture it actually happening. And then I tweeted something like, oh my God, I would love to write jokes for you. I don't think she ever saw that tweet, to be clear. I got the job through like Andy Samberg's people. And so I ended up writing for the Golden Globes, which was really fun. And Sandra Oh is somebody who I feel so affected by, and I'm sure I'm not the only person. I feel like everyone feels this way, regardless of your race. But because I am a kid of immigrants, when I see somebody like Sandra Oh, I'm like, I'm going to be like you when I'm older. You know what I mean? Like, she is Canadian and American, but is such an Asian American person who grew up here, who is from, you know what I mean? And so when I see my mom and then I see Sandra, I'm like, oh, I'm probably going to feel more like Sandra as a person at that age. And so whenever I see her, it's so liberating. It's like, oh, there's a future. And it's so glorious. Imagine your future being half as nice as Sandra Oh's life. Like, what a dream. What a dream.
But this is what I'm saying. I'm saying someone is watching late night and seeing you on there on the couch and being like, yo, who's that girl? Like, I you know, like, you seem so relatable. You seem like someone I feel like you're my friend, you know, when I saw you on there. We're friends, yeah. But like, someone is seeing that and like, oh, how do you become a writer on that? I didn't know they had, I know they had writers. I know you could be Korean American and be a writer as well. You know what I mean? Like, that opens up suddenly, like, oh, you can do that? Like, that's a job you can have, you know?
I really think I have ended up doing this because I watched The Office in 8th grade, and I was like, Mindy Kaling, I couldn't believe her job and her career, and then I just wanted exactly what she had. And I truly was just like, oh, I bet it's because of Mindy Kaling that I ended up even aspiring to this, you know? I bet that's true for every Asian girl in comedy.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a sense in which it makes us, it gives us the permission that sometimes even our parents would never give us, right?
Yeah.
To see that there are people out there who have paved the way and opened that door.
That being said, my parents love that I do comedy.
Oh, what?
Yeah, that's not a joke. It's for real. Yeah.
Well, I mean, if they're traditional Korean parents, they might be like, why are you not? No, they're not like that at all.
No, they were really genuinely
good
quite
parents.
stoked. Yeah.
Stoked.
My grandpa's like he's still alive, but Johnny Carson's no longer alive. That's why I use the past tense. We should edit that out. Okay. But my grandpa was a huge Johnny Carson fan. And so when I was like, I want to write for TV and I write for late night, he was like, hell yeah. That's like the best job. Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's very exciting.
I mean, it's rare, but it also shows that, you know, over time, there's like more space that we're taking up, and the more space we take up, the more it feels like we can take up space, right?
Yeah. Although I will say sometimes I think the answer isn't that we should take up more space. I think it's that white people should take up less space. I think, sometimes when
it's a zero sum. There's only so much space.
Yeah. It's a small planet.
But you know, to that end, I mean, Minji, you went from being a fashion designer to being a costume designer, and you started.
I do both.
And you do both, yes. But in moving into this television space and starting to actually, you know, dress people for the screen, you know, what was different about doing that versus having this sort of influential East Village boutique and so on and so forth?
I think by the time I got into costume design, I was able to take directions from other people and not have that social anxiety of when I was 23. And I didn't feel the need to hide anymore. But at the same time, I always felt like fashion was limiting in the sense that I was beholden to trends, which is fine. I love trends, and obviously I'm a fashion designer, and I love big sleeves, and you know. But there's something about costume design that really focuses on creating a character that I really love, you know, because above anything growing up, I was television and movies was my babysitter, it was my best friend, it was my parents. I'm making myself sound so, but I grew up on it, you know what I mean? And it really shaped who I was, and it's something that I wanted to influence and parlay my skills into. And so it's not so much like trend or creating designs, it's more about this person is this, like, why are they this? You know, and that instant, like, you look at a person and you see the way they're dressed and you know who they are or like what they do. You know, it's that kind of thing. That's the difference.
It's so true, because like the costume you see on somebody wearing on TV is a part of their character.
It's completely, and that's where actors start. They're like, when I call or if I have a conversation with an actor, like, who are you? You know, or who do you think you are? You know, and
I'll make you look like that.
right. And it's definitely a collaboration and between the actor and myself, and yeah, it's about building character. That's the big difference.
Well, okay. Well, this is a good time for us to take a break. This live thing is getting to me, guys.
I know. No actual break, but
Yeah.
you know.
This is a good time for us to take a break. But when we return, we will do our favorite segment, the good, the bad, and the WTF. So we'll be right back. We will not take a break.
We'll go right back in.
All right.
Okay.
And we're back. All right, on this second half of They Call Us Bruce, this is where we do our favorite segment, our signature segment, the good, the bad, and the WTF. Jeff Yang, would you please lay down the rules of engagement?
I shall, for the second time tonight. It will be our roundtable segment, the segment that, you know, pretty much enables us to take a single topic and serve it up 3 ways. We're going to talk about the good of the thing, the positive, the bad of the thing, the ugly side, the dark side, and then finally the WTF. The side we're still puzzling over, and we're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the WTF of, you know, let's just say the good, the bad, and the WTF of being Asian American in public, like publicly Asian American. The first time you saw yourself on screen, the first time you put yourself out there as Asian American, it meant something different, and I think that, especially in these worlds of fashion and entertainment, it's taken a long time for Asian Americans to just feel comfortable to really own their Asian Americanness in this space. So we'll start with the good of that, and we'll start with Minji. What's the good about, you know, kind of being publicly Asian American, for people to see that you're Asian American in the category and the industry that you're in?
I think it's positive being Asian American in fashion and costume design, because what's positive about it?
It's a moment right now, right? I feel like there's more Asian Americans in fashion publicly than ever before.
Yes, and being especially Korean, of Korean descent, and all the cultural things that are happening from Korea that's kind of being exported into the world, there's like a cachet perhaps with that, like, I don't know, like boy bands. Like I've been looking at like K-pop, listening to K-pop my whole life. I have always hated it.
Ooh,
Sorry.
shots fired.
But no, they're great. But the whole world is caught up to it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? There's a sense of like, oh, the world is catching up to and appreciating everything that I am. And I definitely sense that difference. I feel that shift, you know, even though maybe mentally I haven't caught up to it quite yet. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, it's amazing to be Asian American right now.
It is just an honor.
I love it.
How about yourself, Karen?
Honestly, I don't know how to interpret this question, because I don't think I think about it in the same way.
That's the generational divide, for real.
It might be, because I think when I talk about it with my friends, there isn't really an emphasis on being publicly Asian. It's like, well, duh, I'm Asian if I'm in public, like wherever I am, I'm gonna just be
This is
Asian.
what you're gonna get.
Yeah, and so I don't really, like, even when I think of myself as a performer, I don't think of myself as like should I be Asian on stage or should I not be? It's like whatever I say is inherently an Asian American perspective. It's just my own perspective, and I can't represent anything bigger than myself. I don't want to represent anything bigger than myself. It's just like if I say something, that's what Karen Chee is saying. So I don't know if I have an answer to your question, but I am fascinated by it. Yeah. In a good way. I mean that in a good way.
For being intrigued by my question.
I am. It's a great question. Yeah.
I actually think that is a significant generational divide. I think that there's a sense in which being able to be comfortable in your own skin is much more of a revolution than you may be aware. Grasshopper. You know yourself, and thus you own your power. But it's true because like I talk to I have the same situation with my kids. Like when I talk to my kids, I ask them. It's like when you this is APA Heritage Month, what are you doing? Are you doing any special activities? Are you being particularly Asian today? They look at me like I'm a crazy person because that's actually kind of a crazy thing to have. But, it's like they are having activities, but for them it's not something they had to fight for. It's not something they had to actually prove out. It wasn't the first time that anybody did anything, and that ability to just feel a little more at ease is something that took a long time.
That's true. I also do wonder if it is because I grew up in the Bay Area, where it was just like, of course you're Asian, and it's like, if you're not Asian, then you're in the minority. Like I grew up in a city that was like over 50% Asian, I think. And so then when I went to college, usually when people go to college, they're like, suddenly it's so like, you find Asian people. And I went to college that was like 20% Asian. I was like, where did everybody go? Like, what is going on? So maybe in that sense, I also am a bit more privileged about feeling lucky in my skin.
Karen's story is my story, but like 20 years later, I think, because I felt the same way about growing up in the Bay Area and then going to college, and then there's not a lot of Asians, right? And that's where but then for me, that's where I like kind of found my Asian American identity. I think Karen already went with that intact, like I'm good, you know what I mean? It's a different attitude, and I was thinking about the way that reflects in APA Heritage Month, right? Where we're like, yes, it's our month. It's gonna be lit. Look at us. Look at us. But I realize now, like, as I've gotten older, and I realize, like, Heritage Month is not for my benefit. It's for everyone else's benefit. It's where we make everybody else celebrate it, right? And like
we're forcing you to listen to us this 1 month.
And you guys sound beautiful, for the record.
All right, so let's then quickly do the dark side.
Yeah.
The dark side. Is there a dark side to being Asian American in public today? I mean, I guess there kind of is.
I have a joke about this on stage, but it's kind of true, which is I saw myself on screen for something, and I looked at it and I was like, Asian representation has gone too far. I should not be on TV with my weird little face. I guess that's my answer. Minji?
I guess there's a thing where people call Asians the what is it, the model minority.
Yeah.
Because we're so hot.
Is that the
supermodel minority?
Model minority.
The hidden origins of that term. Yeah.
I don't know. There's that. There's also. What is the question? Is there negative aspects of being Asian? I mean, yes. There's still racism that I still like. I was saying that I've lived in New York since '92, and I've never felt fear here until the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. I still feel like am I back in high school? Like I feel targeted here. But is that it just in my mind? Has anybody ever said anything to me, to my face? Never. No. Maybe, I don't know why. Maybe it's because I'm not grandmother yet. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. But I have that, I still have that cloud. And, that's the negative thing.
Yeah. I will tell you, I don't know if you guys saw, the Batman, the big DC movie, of course, like the first 7 minutes of it takes place on a subway platform where this Asian guy who, looks like a cinematic version potentially of me being like chased down by thugs and like brought to the edge of the platform. And literally it's like, I almost couldn't watch the rest of the movie, So
It's
yeah,
I
there's
think
that.
it's weird. Like we grow up our whole lives like wanting to be visible, like wanting visibility, representation. That is going to this. I feel like now it is like there's a hyper visibility of just being on the street and feeling vulnerable. You know, like I'm too visible. Like, can I make myself smaller? You know, that's what. That's the feeling of the last couple of years. You know.
Yeah,
So
that's
now,
interesting.
yeah. So now we're on to the WTF, and there's a lot of WTF just in that. It's sort of like weird relationship we have with our own visibility now.
Yeah.
But is there a WTF? I think maybe even just from your stance, Karen, of now being like a public person. I think as a writer, you're not
Yeah.
necessarily expecting to be as visible as you have been.
Right.
And sitting on the couch, being in front of audiences,
Yeah.
being a part of the show visibly. Has
Right.
that changed things for you?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I do a lot of like stand up and performance stuff, and so that was really cool to get to be on that couch and to do that from, you know, I think late night is also really nice about hiring writers who are also performers in hopes that they will perform on the show. So that's been really fun. I'm trying to think of a WTF for it.
Is there an anecdote that was kind of like the first time you actually were visibly on air on Seth Meyers' show that's sort of like is a WTF?
That's such a good question. I mean, I do constantly think, what the fuck? But that's because I'm lost all the time. I'm like, where am I? What am I supposed to be doing? I often open a new tab, like on, you know, my computer, and then I'm like, I don't remember what I was doing. Yeah, okay. Is that helpful? Sorry. I need a better answer for this. I'm trying to think. Oh, a moment where, maybe this is kind of different, but the way that segment came to be, which was a moment where I was like, this is surely not happening to me, is that I, in the writer's room, had reference to Neopets, and none of the other writers knew what Neopets was. It was two things. It was Neopets, and then also I mentioned that someone had said they had gotten shingles because they had chicken pox. And I said, I don't think I'm going to get shingles because I had the chicken pox vaccine, so I never had chicken pox. And then people were like, that's a lie. There's no such thing as a chicken pox vaccine because they hadn't gotten it. And I guess that people started getting it maybe in the early 90s or something or late, I don't know. And so there were like moments like that in the writer's room. That's how that segment came to be, is I would say stuff and people would be like, you're making stuff up. And I'd be like, no, Neopets is real and it's awesome. Yeah.
So it was just an invitation into your unique reality that nobody else actually recognized?
Yeah, but then I would text all my friends being like, you guys remember Neopets, right? Like, I'm not going crazy. And they'd all be like, yeah, Karen, we know what Neopets is.
What is a Neopet?
I don't know. Oh my God, I'm ready. Do we have another hour? It's like a cute online world. It's honestly what Facebook Meta is trying to be.
It is the metaverse, yeah.
Yeah, it's the metaverse. You pick a little fantasy animal and you feed it and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, take us home, Minji.
Sorry, I didn't answer your
No,
question.
it's super.
A what the fuck moment?
Yeah, just a moment. Yeah,
Can
a
I
WTF
I
moment.
have to bring this up, but there's a movie that I recently saw called Licorice Pizza.
Licorice. Oh yeah.
Like, what the fuck are they trying to do with that?
Can
you explain that to me?
I've
to
heard it
walk
described, and I mean I've seen it. It's basically like a long series of uncomfortable moments, right? But the scene that Minji is talking about, which if you're an Asian American woman, I think especially even just watching
right.
that,
That's like a double
It's a double
insult.
whammy. Is a scene where this guy who runs a Japanese restaurant basically has a Japanese wife. He's a white man who owns a Japanese restaurant, has a Japanese wife, and in communicating to her, he, for whatever reason, drops into like this sort of, very thick, fake Japanese accent, like, and it's like,
Who is that supposed to be funny for?
it's not supposed to be funny. I mean, honestly, the director has basically said that it is an attempt to kind of mock the racism of the moment. But
is he using? But I think he's using it as like a.
the other people,
Exactly.
we're all laughing. Well, I mean, as it's a WTF moment, but it's a WTF moment that sort of pulls it into the present, because that movie was like this freaking year.
Yeah.
What
we
the
are,
fuck,
we are,
Paul Anderson?
we are not yet at a place where even the memories that people have, because that's a movie about nostalgia, won't kind of resurrect and unearth these moments of objectification and dehumanization for us.
That movie was up for an Oscar. For like
Exactly.
writing Oscars. So it's not just that it just came out. It was actually like held up as something to be accoladed, and you're like,
It's not okay.
We're still doing this?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, hopefully we've gotten that out of our system. That's all.
All right, that's our
All right.
3 rounds. Awesome.
Yay.
Thank you guys so
We get
much.
to answer any of the questions.
All right. Karen, where can people find you online?
Online, I'm on Twitter and Instagram, but hopefully we'll soon be off of both.
Smart woman. Minji, how about yourself?
I'm on Instagram under Mink Brooklyn and minkbrooklyn.com.
Excellent. Jeff Yang, how about you?
Original Spin on Twitter. And how about you, Phil?
I'm at Angry Asian Man and on angryasianman.com. You can find They Call Us Bruce at They Call Us Bruce. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being on the panel. Until next time.
Peace. All right. One more. Thank you so much.
It's so hot up here, guys.
All right. We know it's a bit of a marathon here, but this is the last, and certainly not the least. Let us bring up Anil Dash, tech observer. He was CEO of Glitch until last week. Well, he's still CEO, right? But you sold the company, which is freaking amazing. He actually just literally corrected the bio in the green room. And Ben Sun, founder of Primary VC and the founder of Asian Avenue and the rest of Community Connect. So I heard, oh my God. So those of you who saw the internet, the beginnings of social media happen, may have arrived there because of Ben Sun. So with that, let's kick it off and get this last show on the road.
All right, let's do this. Hello and welcome to this special edition of They Call Us Bruce, an unfiltered conversation about what's happening in Asian America. Live from WNYC's Greene Space.
Woo!
I'm Phil Yu.
And I'm Jeff Yang. And this is the third and final in our series of special live, in-person, in front of a studio audience recordings of this podcast, celebrating kind of the memories we shared together over the last 30 years in the book that we wrote called Rise. This particular podcast, we're bringing together two friends of ours who, in many ways, shaped the experience and the observation of technology for us over these 30 years. We'd like to welcome to our show, first, Anil Dash, who is one of the most perspicacious, insightful people writing about technology for these last 30 years on his blog, anildash.com. It's anildash.com now, right? But also CEO of Glitch, which just got sold
last week. As we record this. Yes.
And yet he deigned to join us on stage. No, but thank you so much, Anil, for being here. And then we have Ben Sun. Now, Ben, for those of you guys who remember back in the early aughts, when the internet was still sort of trying to figure itself out, there was a company that brought together communities that were seeking ways to connect with one another. And that's why they called it Community Connect. Coming out of Community Connect were Asian Avenue, which for those of us who were on that early internet may remember with some fondness. Black Planet. How many other satellites were there in the galaxy of Community Connect?
There was really one other, which is Mi Gente, which is focused on the Latinx community.
Yes. So the big three, at least at that time, and we welcome you here in part to share a little bit and shed a little light on that kind of early efflorescence of Asian Americans online. I think part of the reason we want to do this segment in particular is because so many of us, when we were growing up, were disconnected from all the Asian American stuff that was happening elsewhere. People who grew up in the middle of America or people who grew up on the coast, we didn't know what was going on elsewhere. And the internet provided for the first time a means for us to connect at a distance with these other sources, the other well springs of kind of Asianness in a way that in a lot of ways invented our culture, this sort of Asian American emergent culture. And Asian Avenue was kind of at the beginning of that. Let's start with that. Let's tell us a little bit about the founding of Asian Avenue and why it became such a phenomenon?
Sure. So it's interesting. I was born and raised in New York. I was born and raised in Queens. Coming out of college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. My brother was 7 years older, worked in investment banking. He said, hey, if you're interested in business, why don't you do an analyst program? So I applied, got into one. I was working at Merrill Lynch. It was 1995. I was going through training, and this company called Netscape went public. And I remember asking a coworker, I go, what's a web browser? Right? So, back then, even in college, we didn't even use email.
Yeah.
But I happened to join the tech group in investment banking, and we started pitching internet IPOs. And basically learned quickly that, wow, this is pretty exciting stuff. And it was actually a founder and CEO of a company we were trying to take public made this comment to me. He said, before the web, the internet was all about community. Because pre the web, it was all these online bulletin board systems that would connect researchers and scientists together to collaborate. And he basically said when the web came around, it was like a neutron bomb hit the internet, meaning it killed all the people but left the information standing instead of the building standing. And so the World Wide Web, the really first generation, was a lot of just static content. And he basically made this comment. He said, well, I think community is going to migrate to the web. And back then, the most popular online service was AOL, but it was AOL that kind of, you had to download a piece of software with a CD-ROM and your
I had 500 of those discs.
Everyone did. Everyone did. It was unbelievable. But the most popular features on AOL were things like instant messenger, chat rooms, message boards. And so you kind of realize, well, it's in this walled garden. It should be on the web. And so I just started thinking about this whole concept of online community. And being someone that grew up and was born and raised in New York, I said, well, let's build online communities or real world communities. And communities being around race and ethnicity, especially being someone's Asian American, just made the most sense. And so we basically came up with the idea, and this is back in 1996, so this predates years before Facebook and even MySpace. And so we launched Asian Avenue with this intention of building this online community for Asian Americans. And just as you said, Jeff, I thought it was something tied to my own identity, being a New York Asian American. But then when we launched it, I remember people created pages, they started uploading photos. I remember seeing people from the West Coast start posting photos of their Acura Integra all souped up. And I was like, what is this? What is this bizarre car culture thing? And this is years before Fast and Furious. And so it was suddenly getting me exposure to this notion of a real Asian American identity beyond the microcosm of New York City, which was just so fascinating to see, and really started connecting all these Asian Americans around the country, really helping shape that notion of community and identity together, which was pretty special.
I just want to call out something about this moment, right? Because I was on the web then too, right? And my experience was the opposite. I grew up in a town with literally zero people of color. We were the only family of color in town. And, I came to the web, probably like you, I was that nerd and was finding the internet. But I came to New York City in 1997. Right. And so part of my entry to being a New Yorker was seeing Asian Avenue, seeing these communities. Right. And I knew what the technology could do. And you kind of look at today's internet, and this was like a primitive, sticks and stones version of what you see today. So every day you're in Slack or Discord and you're chatting with people, or and you're on a Facebook group and they're talking about, you want to, buy somebody's, stuff they have for sale or whatever it is. And all of that was there then. I mean, you did this 25 years ago, right? And it's all there then. It's primitive versions, and it's not as slick, and it's not on your phone. But I think it's impossible to overstate how far ahead this was. If you kind of squint at it, you have a vision of the behavior we're all doing every day today then. And that's radical and wild and undersung. So I feel like there's a part here where because you were grounded in community, you could see the future. And I think that just repeats over and over and over, which is that, our communities show us where the world is going, almost within a sense of inevitability.
Yeah, I tell folks, imagine launching a social networking site when there were only 2 or 3 digital cameras on the market. So we said,
and nobody has one.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And in fact, the first one I bought was $800. It could hold 20 photos. It had no preview screen, right? And so I tell people we used to offer to allow members to mail in their photos, and literally we had just scanners that we would just take with photos and scan them in.
Yeah.
And And we couldn't even return the photos back, so we just basically threw them
They're
out.
done, right?
Wow, that was like the first NFTs, right? Just burn the original.
Basically right. That's exactly. We're really ahead of ourselves.
Can I say that when we sat down to write our book, and we were at that stage where like, all right, what goes in it? What tells the story of Asian America? And we had this blank spreadsheet, and we're just, all right, let's start throwing out topics in that version of like, if we could put anything in this book, what is it? What is the story? Asian Avenue came along pretty quickly, and we were like, we got to do something. We got to do something about Asian Avenue. And we're like, are people gonna, it was kind of it was a moment, but it's past. Are people gonna remember that? Let me tell you. It is one of our most popular. When we bring it up in talks and we talk about that Asian Avenue is covered in the book, people are like, "Holy shit!" And everyone can name their screen name from that era.
But I mean, Solange's last record launched on Black Planet, which has been through a lot of evolution since then. But she's obviously calling back to the heyday, right? Like it is this sense of like there's a history there.
It's pretty amazing. I mean, as Jeff kind of commented, it was a lot of people's like first real online experience, and it wasn't just their first online experience. They started just changing the way they behaved. And so connecting with other Asian Americans. And I remember the first time I found out a friend of mine went on a date, right? This is before online dating was even a thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, and I'm the one that founded the company, right? I founded the site. And she's like, hey, I went on a date with this guy. And I'm like, you met somebody on our site and
On the
went
internet?
on a date?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Well, and it's hard to explain again, like how radical it is because culture has shifted so far. Like, a couple of years later, Zanga came along and had an enormous Asian American audience as well. But my wife and I were introduced by a couple that had met online, and we went to their wedding and everything. They're still good friends of ours, and they're still married, and they didn't tell anybody. So like their families like, well, how'd you meet? And they'd be like, I don't know, like real vague, because it was like that's what psycho killers do. They meet people online, like you don't.
But it's like totally normal.
But it's impossible. Well, I mean, I can't imagine somebody now not at least having the app on their phone if they're trying to meet somebody. They'd be like, I hate the app, but it's on my phone. I try not to look at it. I don't swipe on anybody, right? But they got the app, right? I mean, and it's so far in the inverse of like any meaningful relationship, not just dating or romance or whatever, but the sense of like today, if I say somebody's my friend and I'm like, yeah, I haven't met them in person yet. That's like not really that big a deal. You know what I mean? Like people are like, sure, okay, you probably know them on Twitter or you met them on online, or it's COVID and you were on Zooms, whatever it was. But they didn't. There isn't that stigma. But at that point, when you're building this, you're sort of planting the seeds for what is eminently normal now, which is people are going to consume, content and make community based on their identity based on. So I think it's undersung. I think people don't realize how radical it is, and they don't realize how brave it is to do what you did.
I want to actually delve a little into that because we did a little mini survey. We haven't had much time to actually share the results. But I think in this particular segment, this is a survey we put out there for a lot of people RSVPing for the live event and so forth. We wanted to ask people certain things about their memories of the early days of digital culture, among other things. So we asked them for what their screen names were. And a lot of people were very embarrassed. They sort of, they put their names out there and said, of course I don't use that anymore. But it really shows how people's online handles were emblematic in some ways of how they sort of badged themselves publicly. And I think actually online screen names were some of the first places where Asians represented themselves in some weird ways as Asian, right? So we had people saying, my screen name was Tiny X Panda. We also had a smoked panda, and the person said, "Do I really need to explain why I retired this?"
I like this one. It says this person had 88 in all their handles because it's a lucky number, but they stopped using it this year because I found out people thought it meant I was born in '88. I don't know if they were appalled that people thought they were too old or too young. Yes.
We had people saying Big Egg Roll was their screen name, the Bruce Lee MC, Confucius Skater Punk. I mean, this was an era where a lot of people, beginning on AOL and then eventually on Asian Avenue as well, they were forming a culture which our third musketeer, Philip Huang, nostalgically remembers as being very much what shaped him. This idea of ASEAN pride culture, right? And it was sort of like a bit of a patchwork quilt of a lot of things kind of borrowed or appropriated from other cultures, but it was a way in which Asians in digital culture especially, for the first time, were able to badge themselves as being part of a larger community. And I think you probably saw a lot of that starting to play out as Asian Avenue began to grow.
Yeah, and it was interesting in contrast to a site like Black Planet, like Asian Avenue, when they talked about the Asian American community, it's like it's not one monolithic group. And in fact, if you looked at kind of the Asian American population, we were much more suited for second and third generation Asian Americans, not more recent immigrants. Mm-hmm. So I tell people it's a really kind of different market. Like my parents, they kind of identify themselves as like probably Chinese or Chinese American. They don't really consider themselves like this Pan-Asian identity. Now I was born and raised here. My Chinese is terrible. I have a lot more in common as being someone that's Chinese American here in the US than someone that's Korean American or Vietnamese American, et cetera, because we shared a similar kind of upbringing and culture and challenges and figuring out identity. And being able to really kind of see that get formed on Asian Avenue, where people were still trying to understand their own identity and this notion of this Asian American culture and what that means and what this community kind of, what this community kind of means to them and what people perceived of it was really kind of a unique time versus a site like Black Planet. I tell folks, well, here you have a community that had a civil rights movement and has hundreds of years of history, and it's not this kind of, mixed kind of bag as much as the Asian American community of immigrants. And that was just really interesting to see how those two communities running on the same technology and platform we built actually behave really differently and how they impacted the communities.
Yeah, and all of that is true in ways which I think today, at least for Asian Americans, at least for me, there was a certain you look at that era and because of its nascency, I mean, it's a little cringy. Let's be honest. You had people out there who had screen names like this, Lil Asian Gangsta Boy, spelled BOIXX, in capital and lowercase letters. There was a certain kind of almost flailing for a space of representation that they couldn't actually find elsewhere, but somehow the nascency of this community gave them space to define themselves. And in parallel to this, of course, something else was happening or had been happening, and that was, the other half, which is the rise of Asian American startup culture. You guys were a part of it, but by the time you guys were around, there already had been, a series of just incredible successes coming out of our community, a new kind of reinvention of who we were, and a lot of that was embedded in almost like this, how do I put it? Like a perfect storm, right? You had all these young Asian Americans, very educated, graduated from Stanford or Harvard, or in some cases not graduating and going off and starting companies. But, kind of leveraging the fact that they had the sacrifice of their parents, the privilege in some ways to have that education and that opportunity to take a different route through the world. And so that entrepreneurship and that building of a brand new infrastructure for an entire industry, Asian Americans were at the core of it. And South Asians in particular in Silicon Valley, I remember early on there was a group of South Asian entrepreneurs who began literally by saying, we're going to go out there and we're going to invest in each other's companies. We're going to back each other up because we're building this. We know no one else is out there handing us stuff. We got to build it for ourselves.
Yeah. There's a complicated history. I have a really, really ambivalent relationship with the tech industry broadly and with the role that, all Asian Americans play, but especially South Asians. I mean, I do look at, you referenced the sort of peer funding model that a lot of South Asians did. And that was taken directly from lessons learned in building motels, right? That didn't come from, and which is exactly parallel to how a lot of Chinese restaurants were made in small towns, which is like, we're not going to get credit somewhere else. And I don't mean in the attribution sense. I mean in the money sense. We're not going to get credit from the bank. So we have to support each other. And my parents were very much a part of that broader culture, right? So I grew up in rural Pennsylvania. My parents were the first, like I said, the first people of color in our town. My older sister was the first student of color in the history of our school district. And they were the anchors for what became a very sizable South Asian community, where they started the community center that everybody went to, and the temple, and all those kinds of things. And for basics, like for example, we couldn't get spices, so they would come, and it was 5 hours to drive to New York, and they would take turns making the drive to come and do it, and they would gather their money together and do it. And that's how they also funded their friends who started a hotel, who now own a whole line of hotels, and they sort of built these capabilities out of necessity. There's no surprise that that filters into their vision of entrepreneurship. At the same time, and I've made as many hackneyed jokes about my parents wanting me to be a doctor as anybody else in the world, and it's true. It's not that they didn't want me to be, and I did do the drop out of college and go to tech because I believed in that myth to a large degree when I was a teenager and did that. But I'm much more critical now. I mean, I think a lot of our move into sort of some kinds of entrepreneurship was also about respectability politics. I think a lot of it was performing model minorityship in a lot of ways, and I think we ignored the impacts of some of the technologies we created. It's like I'm really proud. I'm proud of who I am, and I'm proud to be in the industry, and I'm proud of what I've accomplished. And I look at the impact, right? So the reason, like my father was a very early Indian immigrant. He came in 1963. This is before the immigration laws changed in 65. At that time, there's about 5,000 Indian immigrants in the entire United States, and he didn't know any of them, right? So that's as isolated as it gets. There's no way, forget phoning home, there's no way to write a letter home, right? So he is completely isolated. And I thought about what does it take to be, the question all of us who are children of immigrants ask, what does it take to do that? To go to the other side of the world and leave behind everybody you've ever known? I can't answer that one. But I can answer, why was he allowed in? How did he get the visa, right? And he's an engineer, and he built highways, and the U.S. is building their highway system at that time. And it's a direct parallel. So whether it was you go back, a century plus, and it's the trains, and you go back to the middle of the last century, and it's the highways, and then you go back to the beginning of this century, and it's what they call the information superhighway. And each time you have a pattern, we're going to let in South Asians, we're going to let in Chinese Americans, we're going to let in some people to perform model minorityship here. Mm-hmm. And they will get ahead, and they will have an opportunity, and they will be used as a lever where, in my dad's case, like I'm, again, fiercely proud of what he's done, and I know the highway system was bulldozed through neighborhoods of communities that we now try to have solidarity with. But you look at the black and brown neighborhoods and the Jewish neighborhoods that were destroyed by those highways, and I think maybe that's why we were let in. And I look at now the biggest driver of immigration of, again, Chinese Americans, Indian Americans, everybody that's coming into the technology industry. And then I think, what is the technology industry doing? Well, we can look at our own communities this time, because you look at the, Uber drivers having to carry on a hunger strike here in New York City. And it is, who were the engineers that built the app that had this function of taking away their livelihoods to the point where they couldn't survive? Like, we're being turned against ourselves, let alone the other communities we should have solidarity with. So I look,
a lot of those Uber drivers are Asian.
Yeah. And so I just think of that's this sort of double-edged sword, which is like, I am proud of what I've done, I'm proud of what our community's done, and I look at what it's been leveraged towards, and it's a much more ambivalent view, because so many people I know went to work at a Google or a Facebook, and they were at Facebook at the time when WhatsApp is enabling a genocide of the Rohingya, which is owned by Facebook. It's like, these are both ours. And we haven't sat with that. We don't have that dialogue. We have we celebrate the wins. AAPI month, right? It's like, yay, we're celebrating the wins. And we should. And then we should sort of say, what have we been party to? And how do we feel about that over time? Like, what am I going to be telling my son?
That is the big question about where we are now and where we're going next, right? I mean, as you're building companies, as you're looking at a sort of a new generation of people kind of rising up and creating, what is the legacy of all that work that had been done, all that investment and all that brain power, really? Where are Asian Americans today in that conversation?
Well, I think tech entrepreneurship has been really interesting versus entrepreneurship by kind of our parents, and in the sense that, there was someone that did a study about entrepreneurship, and they said that immigrants over-index in entrepreneurship. And the big reason why was that like people that had felt like they had an asymmetrical view of their worth, like meaning that as a recent immigrant, people realized their capabilities and their potential, but but people didn't recognize it. So they felt like they had to do entrepreneurship because no one could give them the job that they really wanted, that they coveted and felt they were worth. And so entrepreneurship was more about necessity. And now I think what you see about tech entrepreneurship, it's now about opportunity. So it's kind of gone from this asymmetrical view of your worth to now people probably saying, wow, you're Asian American. Yeah, you should be doing tech entrepreneurs. I remember the very first board meeting I did when I started my company, when we did Asian Avenue, I was like 23. My brother was actually on my board because, I could put him there. And then, but I had this guy that was, vice chairman of the investment bank, and this guy that was the founder and CEO of Planet Hollywood. They all came to this meeting, and my brother made this joke when he's like, whenever you spoke, it was like the room stopped, and they were like, they were like listening to every single thing you said, like you were the oracle. And my brother was like, that guy's my little fucking brother. And he's like, and they must think you're Jerry Yang, the founder of Yahoo. My brother honestly got
I get that a lot, man.
Totally.
It's like
Big
literally.
Jeff
You
Yang.
look a lot more like Jerry than him.
And so I think this different, this asymmetrical value of your worth has completely got flipped on its head for entrepreneurs, and Asian American tech entrepreneurs were like, okay, yeah, we kind of expect you to potentially do these things, which I think is an amazing privilege. Like VCs are willing to give you money and take big swings and try to build transformative companies as the leader of that business. That's pretty amazing. Now, as far as the business that they're building and the moral obligation of it, I think that's a challenge with tech in general, right? There's a real question about the technology you're building and the misuses of it, and I think that's just being called out in general now, which I think is a good thing. But I also think the really positive thing about what it's meant for the Asian American community, especially about tech entrepreneurs, is just given this amazing opportunity for Asian Americans to really take risks and lead and create something pretty special.
All right. It's time to take a break, y'all. But when we return, we will do our favorite segment, the good, the bad, and the WTF. So let's take a break. We'll be right back.
But no actual break.
Y'all are keeping your energy up. It's kind of amazing. I'm very grateful.
No,
thank
you all. Thank you all.
Thank you guys.
We're in the home
That's
stretch
the audience,
now.
for real. We're in the home stretch.
Okay. And we're back. All right. We're going to close out this episode of They Call Us Bruce with our favorite segment, our signature segment, the good, the bad, and the WTF. Jeff Yang, bring us home. Lay down the rules of engagement.
Yes, this is our signature segment, our roundtable segment, where we actually ask our guests to serve a single topic 3 ways. Those of you in the room, you've heard this 3 times already. We're going to go first the good, the positive side, then the bad, the negative, the frustrating, finally the WTF, which interpret as you will, doesn't have to be good or bad, just, something you're still holding space for, something you're still thinking about. So let's begin, Anil, with you. I think we're going to do the good, the bad, and the WTF of Asian American digital culture.
Asian American digital culture. That's a tricky one. I think
we'll start with the good.
Yeah, I think the good part sort of ties back to, what we talk about all the way back to that sort of Asian Avenue era that still carries forward, is like people are still making really cool, weird shit on the internet and sharing it with each other. And if you ask people, like, is that still going to be around in 2022? 20 years ago, they would have been like, nah, it's going to die off. People aren't going to do it. Or, if you told them about, even 6 months ago, oh, we're all going to spend all their time in like the same 3 apps that were on our phone. And then I look at this was not made by an Asian American, but it's an example that pops to mind, is like Wordle, right? Where everybody's playing this like little word game on their phone. And it's like, it was made, in honor of Josh Wardle, who made it in honor of his Asian American partner. But it is an act of love. But the thing is, like, a regular website made by some dude on his own for somebody he loves, and everybody on the internet loves it and uses it. When's the last time we heard about that? It's not like some giant company. It's not like stealing all your data, doing creepy things. It's just a game, and he made it for, he made it for his girl. Like, that's like, that thing is like, it's still true, and it still exists. So that is still good and pure, and is like what got me into technology in the first place. You could just make something and give it to people, and they might like it. I'm I'm heartened because I wouldn't have guessed, and I try not to be cynical, but I would not have guessed like the hottest app of 2022 is going to be a website made by some dude.
All right. Ben, how about yourself? What's the good?
I think
What's good?
I think the good has definitely been entrepreneurship, especially tech entrepreneurship. I mean, I remember when I left investment banking, I told my parents and my brother, my parents especially, that I was going to leave my investment banking job to build an online community for Asian Americans, African Americans, Latinos. They were like, oh my God.
That's not a doctor at all.
No.
Yeah.
And so, the thought of just like taking risks and building a business was just so crazy to them versus like, hey, you should be a doctor or get an investment banking job and have a steady paycheck, and actually being able to build and create has been pretty amazing. So you see this like wave of entrepreneurs. Like, I work with a founder and CEO of a company that just went public called Coupang. I met the entrepreneur here playing basketball at Stuyvesant High School, Korean American guy that basically, use that energy that he had both, being raised in Korea, but also growing up in the US and realizing he wanted to pursue building a global business and start with building the largest e-commerce company in Korea. And that company went public at a $60 billion market cap. And just to see him take that kind of risk when he came from, he went to Harvard for undergrad, he worked at BCG, he kind of went this traditional path, but was willing to take the leap. And to see him or a Tony Xu from DoorDash or all these countless other entrepreneurs, build big, transformative global companies is a really amazing thing to see.
It's either that or going back to grad school. That's right. But okay, now let's talk about the bad. And again, we've heard a little bit of the bad, but let's focus, I think, maybe specifically on Asian American digital culture. What would you say, Ben, has been the bad of Asian American digital culture?
So there was one pretty unique story in my Asian Avenue journey. So at one point, when the dot-com crash started happening, I had this one investor that was getting updates. He was a small, tiny investor, but he saw that we were still really not profitable. We're burning money, and he calls me up. He's like, "What are you doing? You need to fire everybody. Don't you see what's happening?" And I said, "Hey, just give me a couple more months. We're working on this one kind of business." We were launching basically an online dating service within the site where people would pay a subscription to use it. And I said, just give it a little bit of time. I think we can turn around the business when we launch this. And so he's like, "You're crazy, blah, blah, blah." We launched the online dating service and we become profitable. And we actually become very profitable. And he would get our financials and he's like, "Holy cow, like you're doing really well." And he said, "Hey, we should buy you guys." And I'm like, "Who are you?" And he's like, "My name is Richard Rosenblatt. I run this company in LA called Intermix. It's a publicly traded company." And so I look up what this company does, and it was being investigated by the Attorney General for like spam and spyware, like adware type stuff. And I'm like, we shouldn't be bought by you guys. We should be bought by a bigger media company. And he's like, "Okay." And so these two guys that work for him, though, came to him one day and said, "Hey, we're going to leave the company." He's like, "What do you guys want to do?" He's like, "Well, we want to start this new company. It's modeled after this company in New York called Community Connect. They run Asian Avenue and Black Planet." And he's like, "Oh, I love that business. I tried to buy it. They wouldn't sell it to me. Don't leave. Start this business here. I'll start a subsidiary. I'll fund it. I'll let you guys run it." And they're like, "Okay, great." And so they started this subsidiary and they called it MySpace. And so I was in LA one day and he was like, "Hey, you should meet with the CEO, one of the co-founders and CEO of MySpace." So I go meet with this guy. His name was Chris. And Chris is like, "Hey, my partner Tom came up with the idea. And if any of you were MySpace users, when you first joined, Tom was everyone's friend." And so I'm like, "No."
Almost everybody's friend.
And so I was like, "No, how did Tom come up with the idea from MySpace?" He was like, "Tom was a huge Asian Avenue user." And I said, "Tom Anderson?" Right? Like, obviously not Asian American. He was like, "Yeah, he was on that site picking up on Asian girls all the time." And I was like, "Oh, of course." And I was telling this story to this guy who's now an investor, and he was just laughing, and he was like, "It totally makes sense." This guy I was telling the story to, used to work at News Corp in Corp Dev and News Corp actually bought MySpace for $800 million. And he's like, "Yeah, when we bought MySpace, Tom was under contract to not work on anything on the side. Like, you just have to work 100% on MySpace. But then they found out that Tom was running an Asian porn site on the side. It was like an Asian American, it's like amateur porn site called Team Asia. And the guy was laughing, and he was like, and the way that he defended himself of not breaching his agreement with News Corp was, he said, "I haven't cashed any of the checks." which actually made it worse. It was like, oh yeah, I'm not really doing it for the money. I'm just doing it for the passion, right?
So to speak.
So interesting enough, like the bad of creating, the biggest Asian American social networking site at the time was that you had definitely guys with yellow fever that would come on the site and,
Oh my gosh.
and do stuff like that. But so that's the bad.
Wow. That was That's quite a bad.
I'm glad you told that story publicly because I've known that a long time. Yeah, it's good. It's good to hear that out there. Well, and Zuck was a creep with Facebook when it started too. So it's just like you're the only pure-hearted person that started. I think the bad thing is getting pulled into complicity with things that people don't realize the venality of it, and there's an example that pops to mind today. There's a guy named Joe Lonsdale who's a very well-known investor and entrepreneur. He's a co-founder and I think still CEO of Palantir. Palantir is who spies on everybody, and amongst other things. And he had to go out of his way today to go on social media and talk about how colonialism has been this good force. And sure, the British people had to carry out a little bit of genocide in India, but that's what it takes for Western values to triumph. And you work in this industry, we both do, right? We all do. And there are people that are going to feel coerced to have to do business with this guy or his friends who feel the same way he does, but they just don't put it out there. And I think that's one of those really hard things is the entrepreneurs that you talk about, right? We have these entrepreneurs that are sort of coming out and they're like, I got to get money. I want to do this thing. I have an idea and I have to succeed and I got to pay the bills. And that guy doesn't mind profiting off of us. And I know it because I've seen who he's written checks to. And there are people who say all various degrees of their complicity in it, from not knowing, which is actually valid. A lot of people are like, I didn't see it. I don't know these people. Like, I've been in this industry for 20, 25 years, so I've gotten to see and I know behind the scenes what their other website's about, right? What they're charging money for. And I have this happen all the time where somebody will be in the industry a couple years and they've cashed a check from somebody and they have to sit at the boardroom table with them when the mask comes off. And sometimes I feel like, I've been shouting from the rooftops, like, look out, here it comes, right? And you talk about somebody as powerful as a Peter Thiel, who was on the board of Facebook until 5 minutes ago, and is just openly fascist, openly supports white supremacists. And I know a lot of Asian American founders that have taken money from him because he didn't have the mask off before, 5 years ago or so, at least not as visibly. And even now, they still feel like, well, who am I? If I say no, he's going to tell the other investors. Like that power is coercive. And think about it, this shapes all those apps that are on your phone. All those buttons you push, are built by people that feel like they owe that guy something. So I think that's really, however bad you think it is, it's worse. Like, I can't emphasize enough that they have such a coercive power, and it's rare because most of the time in life, and I don't actually think there are a lot of like evil mustache twirling businessmen. There just aren't. Like, you don't get that far without it. And so I'm always really skeptical of, like, it's not a conspiracy. It's not this, big evil thing. But there are some. Right? It's like, there's actually a couple, like, they're actually bad dudes trying to make actual bad things happen. And our communities are first in line. That is who they want to target, and they're not shy about it. And I think that is something that is actually new. There was a moment where they wouldn't say it. There were a couple years. There was a little window where they knew they might think it, but they know they shouldn't hang it out there. And now the flag is flying.
Wow. Well, yeah, that's like kind of a
Sorry, it's an
breathe-in
upper.
moment. But look, it has always been pretty apparent ever since, that sort of like bargain of the H-1B visa, that they were always going to bring in people to build these things. But the agenda was not ever set by Asian Americans. Even with now Asian Americans as CEOs, there's still this very strong sense that, we're not really steering the agenda. And that is maybe what the next generation's response is going to be, to take a different tack, to forge ethics and not just the bottom line. Let's do the WTF, and then we'll let people ask some questions if they have of our panelists from all the episodes. What is the WTF, Anil, of Asian American digital culture?
I mean, I almost look at it as like, what the fuck is it going to take for us to do the thing that takes care of what our parents really want from us, what our grandparents really want from us, right? Which is, yeah, they want us to make money and be successful and all that kind of stuff. But translating their push for us to study and to do well and to show up and to sort of say, if we have the good fortune to get to have these careers and to get to pay the bills and to not live with the fear and the precarity that they did, then why the fuck aren't we doing more? And I just really feel that obligation. I feel like I don't have to scrape by like they did, and I don't have to mostly live in fear the way that they did. And so why haven't I done more to be worthy of all that they gave me?
Wow. How about you, Ben?
That's pretty noble. I'm going to go a little bit opposite.
Please do.
My WTF is, growing up in the 80s and 90s, that was like being an Asian American male, you were kind of like the bottom of the dating pyramid and not coveted by any woman that was like even Asian American or non-Asian American. And then a friend of mine was telling me, he's like, oh yeah, I was driving my teenage daughters, they're all Caucasian, in the car, and they were talking about like which band boys are hot, and they were like, BTS is the best. And they're like, and like every teenage girl just loves BTS. I'm like, man, I really grew up in the wrong era. So that's my WTF. Oh, WTF, I grew up in the wrong era.
You missed your window,
I
man.
missed my window.
That's highly appropriate. Appropriate WTF, yeah, for this discussion of the decades. Like, yeah, to end it on, we grew up in the wrong era. All right, well, that's our 3 rounds. Thank you so much, guys. Anil, how can people find you online?
AnilDash.com, old-fashioned. I got a website, and then Anil Dash on Twitter and all the other stuff.
Ben, how about yourself?
On Twitter, BK Sun.
Jeff Yang?
Original Spin on Twitter. Phil?
At Angry Asian Men and on angryasianmen.com. You can find They Call Us Bruce at They Call Us Bruce. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being our guest. Thank you to this audience. Until next time.
Peace. All right, we don't actually have, we're over time for what it's worth, but